Hey folks, Michael Mann from Michael Mann Security Services, and to go along with some of the videos you've been seeing here lately, we're going to talk about use of force for private citizens, very specifically church security teams. Now remember, it's about prevention, not response. Your job as a security team member or volunteer at your house of worship is preventing an event. That is done by intelligence and deterrence, which means you're telling the adversary to go to another target. But because this happens, because we implement armed programs, you're implementing armed programs, you might have volunteers that are armed, maybe not with just a handgun, but also with intermediate weapons. Very quickly, I want to talk about use of force. Got an email about it, got a question, and so I'm going to cover it very, very quickly. This is the question about standards. So, use of force. Understand, as a church security team volunteer, or as a security guard that's being paid on post, there's a difference between a citizen, which is us, or like an armed guard, and a law enforcement officer. Police officers have privileges, and they have immunities that citizens do not have because the police officer is working very specifically for a government entity, and you are very specifically volunteering for a church. So there's some things that law enforcement officers can do when we talk about use of force that as a private citizen we cannot. We do not have those immunities. We do not have those privileges. Anything that we do can cause us to be liable both civilly and criminally. So let's cover that very, very quickly. So let's talk about legal requirements. As you start to implement your armed security programs, if there's not a carry permit requirement or an armed guard requirement, or this is not being taught to you, you need to, for your team, go look up the legal requirements for the use of force, very specifically use of force and deadly force for a citizen in your state. In the state of Tennessee, so if you're in Tennessee and you're listening to me or you're watching this video, folks, it's Tennessee Code Annotated, TCA 3911-621, use of deadly force by a private citizen. Go look it up. The laws, in general, throughout the country are pretty much the same for a private citizen when it comes to the use of force. And if you read very specifically in the Tennessee Code Annotated for you Tennessee folks, somebody's got to commit a crime before I actually am able to use force as a private citizen, or I got to see that crime. It talks about an arrest. An arrest is not like what we think about with a police officer handcuffing folks. It just means that you're seizing somebody because you either have reasonable cause to believe they've committed a crime or you've seen a crime being committed. So understand the legal requirements for a private citizen for the use of force in your state. That's going to apply to your security team, okay? Reasonable force versus excessive force. What's the difference? Your team needs to know the difference if this is not being covered. Under law, reasonable force is the minimal amount of force necessary to overcome that opposing force. Now, when I say minimal, this doesn't mean it has to be 50-50, folks. If there's a guy that's 300 pounds and he's attacking me, that doesn't mean that I have to use soft, empty hand control to try to stop him. I might go all the way up to an impact weapon, or that might go all the way to the use of deadly force, depending on the circumstances. Just understand that your volunteers, if they use force, are going to have to articulate and prove that they use the minimal amount of force necessary to overcome that opposing force. Excessive force is that amount of force that goes beyond that minimal amount of force. That is excessive. And so we want to stay in the reasonable side of our use of force as a private citizen. And then that last piece is you should have a use of force continuum for your team if it's not been provided for you in armed training. A use of force continuum is nothing more than a guideline that you can use as a standard that tells you the amount of force that you can use in a given situation. Very specifically, a lot of folks think this applies to police officers only. It applies to us as private citizens also. It starts with your physical security presence on post. That is the most important step in our use of force continuum. Your team providing that physical security presence. Then it can go all the way from soft empty hand control all the way up to the use of deadly force. Look up use of force continuum, folks. You'll get a dozen hits on Google, and you can start to understand what this means and where this is coming from. And I'm not here to tell you what any of these things look like for you. I'm just trying to give you some basic standards and some basic ideas to think about as you start implementing armed teams and intermediate weapons and the use of force by a private citizen. Hey, if you've got any questions, go to us at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. You can get us at ScottM, SCOTTM at michaelmannsecurityservices.com, or you can contact us through our Facebook page at Facebook at Safe with Mann. And remember, it's about prevention, not response.